Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining. Spending your hour this month. Welcome back. For those of you who are returning, welcome to those of you who are new to the Inbound Lunch Bunch. This month, we are going to cover talking about creating content to evidence the benefit of membership. So, a particularly interesting topic, especially as it relates to inbound marketing. Right. So, for those of you practitioners that are out there, or those of you who are thinking about exploring the world of inbound marketing, content plays a very, very large role in all of that. So we're excited to kind of take some time today to delve in a little bit deeper and talk about how you can take that content that you have, create new content, seemingly new content, to evidence the benefit of membership that extends beyond the simple, the stuff that you may already have online, right? So in your membership section of why join, here are your bulleted points, thinking about ways in which to really engage with your individual members based on kind of what you know about them, and seeing what you can do to really demonstrate that value kind of throughout without being obvious and doing the hard push or the hard sell. So just to introduce myself, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Manisha Mangus. I'm the Director of Consulting here at HighRoad Solutions. I joined in early February, excited to be here. Talking to everyone about lead generation and demand generation activities. That's my specialty and my area of expertise. I have more than 15 years of experience in the world of digital marketing, so I've seen kind of a lot of changes that have happened, especially and their impact inside of the association world and the association market. So I've done a lot of consulting, and I'm excited to kind of share some of my insights. I always like to connect with people. Certainly feel free to connect with me on Twitter or on LinkedIn. We are always looking for topics and ideas. We try to find interesting areas of study to share and to discuss with people. Obviously, we only have an hour. Everyone has limited time. These are sometimes very large, broad topics. So if you are looking for something specific, if you'd like to kind of have a conversation, you've got questions, certainly please feel to reach out to us. I'm more than happy to kind of participate and engage. All right, some housekeeping items for all of you. So as usual, feel free to eat your lunch while you're listening. We're brown bagging it, so it's very informal and loose interactive. Where we can make it interactive, we'll try and continue to try to do that. We have a ton of resources available. So in addition to the lunch bunch session that we're reviewing today, we have a number of the sessions that reach back to last year, actually, available on demand. So certainly feel free to kind of reach out, go browse through our HighRoad Views section. We have a ton of materials in there that are actually very useful. In particular, I'm going to call out the toolkit. In particular, especially kind of those of you who are kind of practitioners in the marketing field, you'll appreciate the fact that you don't have to create a lot of things from scratch. These toolkits, I find, are very, very helpful, and they kind of cover the board, right? So again, things that are planning from a planning stage perspective versus, getting into straight executional stuff. There's a lot of stuff in there for you to kind of explore and figure out. So certainly, please feel free to take a look. We've got some interactive features on Zoom that we're using now. I think this is the second month in a row that we've transitioned to Zoom and using that. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A tab that you find in Zoom, and I will try to answer those at the end of our session. So one last thing before we get into our topics for today. Many of you may have already know this, but essentially about 2 years ago, we undertook it to take a look and see what was happening inside of the market with regards to digital marketing. We wanted to understand that, given the tactics that were going on today, why we were pursuing that but not seeing that kind of level of growth. And so we're looking to kind of see what kind of insights we could develop or glean. So we noticed a gap in the market. There wasn't actually kind of a survey or a benchmark report that could kind of year over year consistently talk about the state of digital marketing inside of the association world. So we worked with Demand Metric, and this is the third year that the survey is open. So it's currently open. We encourage you strongly, if you haven't participated already, to participate. And please, certainly fill out the survey and share your insights so that you can participate with us, and we'll share the results. Typically we. Oh. Sorry about that. Hopefully I've muted the right person. As I was saying, so the survey is open. We encourage you to fill it out. It definitely provides a lot of insight, and it's interesting. It will be interesting to see year over year since 2014 how digital marketing kind of in the world of the association world has evolved over time, and what kind of trends, how we're trending going forward. All right. If I have muted the wrong account, somebody please kind of chat me and let me know that you can't hear me. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the refresher piece. That's how we typically get started on our session. So let's cover the basics of inbound marketing again. So this, for those of you who are, knee-deep in inbound marketing as a whole, this image should, this graphic should resonate with you. It should be pretty familiar. Right, so a lot of this is, the inbound methodology, again, has been created by HubSpot in particular, and they've created a framework and a methodology to overlay, on top of, typical marketing strategies, right? So it's nothing new. What they've done is they've created a methodology to kind of break it down and really make it easy for someone to understand why we're doing stuff in a certain way at a certain time. It really goes back to content, right? So it's essentially kind of taking that whole concept of, the concept of push versus pull marketing, right? So push is where we constantly push stuff in front of our users wherever we can see them, and constantly send a message like sell, it's either sell or buy or something, right? So we're constantly getting in front of people versus a pull. When the pull marketing is more us creating value, and those people that we're interested in actually actively seeking us out and looking to engage with us, right? So it's a very different approach. And so the inbound methodology approach, attempts to kind of handle the pull marketing, but actually break it up into pieces. And so a lot of it starts with, this whole, what we call the content funnel. And really the intent is to kind of say, we know that we have strangers who are out there. Those are leads. That's how we want to grow, right? So we've got our members. Those are our advocates. Those are our consumers. Those are our customers. Those are people that are already in the base. Obviously, we want to continue to produce materials and content that make them happy. But, likely now you're probably in a position where you've been tasked to grow your membership base. You've been tasked to grow, your program. So what that means is in order to grow, you have to find people who don't know about you. All right, so you have to reach out to these strangers. And it's very hard to reach out to these strangers if, one, you don't know anything about them, and two, you don't have an email address. So associations today, they're really kind of embraced the whole email marketing concept, and they've really kind of taken that over. But again, that's only helpful if you know the email address. So again, for strangers, we need a way to attract them and pull them in so that they can have a conversation or some sort of level of engagement with us, start to continue to get further engaged so we can move them down and start to convert them, right? So we start with the attraction phase, which is, us trying to get those strangers to interact with us, to take a look at our content, to take a look at our materials. Now, as an association, you have a ton of materials, right? That is what you specialize in producing. So what Inbound is really tapped into is what kind of materials or more kind of what channels are out there that you could use to introduce yourself to people who may not necessarily know anything about you, but they are looking for information you might provide. They have a pain point. They're looking for you to actually provide that information, across some capacity. And they want to explore further, right? So they started to carve out, types of content, such as a blog or leveraging social media, making sure that you've got keyword optimization across your pages, you've got landing pages, right? So it's thinking about ways in which to grab those strangers, move them into the visitors, right? So the visitors are the people who continue to return. So, it's the difference between someone coming on your blog, right, and seeing that, you seem to have some pretty interesting content and interesting topics. I'm going to go ahead and sign up so that I'm going to subscribe to your blog. So I get notifications of anything else that you post. So now you've created a visitor. So then it's the question, how do you move your visitor along that funnel and move them down to further connect and then further engage and delight? So that concept, that inbound methodology concept, you'll see it relies a ton on content. Right? So you need to have an appropriate content. You need to be able to map your content to kind of say, here is the category that they fill into. Now the other piece, another component of this is knowing your buyer, right? Knowing your persona, knowing your member, knowing who that stranger is, right? So they have their own journey that they want to complete, right? And so it's accepting and acknowledging that there is that journey that we have to understand. We have to know what that ideal path is. And usually it starts with what HubSpot calls the awareness stage. All right, so this is essentially, the strangers, the visitors. They have, their aim is our aim is to really make sure that they're aware of us, right? They're aware of what we have to offer. They typically come to us because they have a problem. They have a pain point. They're looking for something, right? So kind of in that category, in that classification, all of your content takes that shift of, what information do you have available that you could provide to these particular users, right? These strangers that you don't know, but if you know a little bit about them, you know their kind of pain points, right? What are they looking for? And then obviously you want to have material that moves them more into the consideration stage. Now we're talking about solutions to their problem. But we haven't introduced ourselves and actually said, you should become a member, right? We're not pitching yet. We're not pushing. We're not doing a hard push as of yet. It's still a lot of consideration. So this is kind of content where you see, top 10 reasons why organizations meet, or, top 10 reasons why you might want to think about an online learning component to your professional development, right? So things like that. So it's things to consider. It's very much kind of the thought leadership content kind of falls into this category, kind of straddles both sides of the awareness stage as well as the consideration stage. But that's a lot where the content kind of, dwells. And lastly, theoretically, they've gone through the journey so far. They like the information that they've seen. Now they're at the decision stage, right? So this is more at the bottom of the funnel, you might have heard. This is content that really kind of is more for like, here's why, here's where you provide your compelling reasons and your compelling arguments for why you should join, right? At this stage, you kind of say like, okay, we know what your problem is. Your problem is that you're looking for ways to further develop your professional career. You don't have a lot of time, right? And this is what we surmise about you based on kind of our ideal people. You don't have a lot of time, you're time pressed, you do have a lot of heavy demands on your job and your profession. Here's all the stuff to consider. We totally understand that, and now here's the reason why you would want to go with us, because we provide the following, right? We provide a number of on-demand resources, not just webinars, but things that you can consume. We've got a number of ebooks that are breakable and that, that you can kind of break up into series and download and take with you, and then you can participate in our, vast community of members, things like that, right? So now it's like, now we've kind of set the stage for, here's your consideration. Now we're talking about here's why you would make that compelling decision to kind of move forward with us and convert and become a member or a customer or eventually kind of become that evangelist. Obviously, in kind of going throughout this process, right, the content that you would put in front of people at each decision stage or each awareness, consideration, or decision stage would be different. Right, so again, here's some examples of things that you could use compelling-wise, right? So again, it's taking the standpoint of content is king. Yes, we all know that. It's really now being strategic about the content and applying it to which awareness, which stage, right? What makes the most sense for the people who are strangers to us? They don't know about us. We don't know much about them. We have an idea of what they probably are like because, again, we're doing some sort of targeted research. We're doing some targeted marketing, right? So it's not a complete stranger. We know our ideal, persona, if you will, but we don't know they don't know much about us. So what can we put in front of them to get them into that awareness stage to start to build some sort of a relationship or engagement with us? Right, so it's really thinking about things from that perspective, and that's, kind of one of the underpinnings of inbound marketing. And the other piece, and you will have heard me kind of say this many times throughout the course of the year. You're going to hear me harp on this a little bit. Personas are really, really important. They are, kind of the underpinnings and one of the pillars of this whole entire framework. If you don't know your personas, you are in a little bit of a bind because, again, we're going from the spray and pray approach to very targeted sniper approach, right? In order to do that, you really need to know who you're talking to, right? It's very hard to build content and build compelling content and distribute it and figure out what channel to distribute it through, how to write it, how it should be consumed if you don't know who you're writing for, right? And this is beyond the typical demographics. This is where we talk in personas about psychographics, behavior traits, right? So we want to know the well-rounded consumer, the well-rounded person, who's our ideal member, and how they live their daily lives, right? Are they white? Are they male? Are they affluent? Do they spend a lot of time on the road? Therefore, they rely on their phone a lot, to communicate. So they have someone who screens calls for them because they're so much on the road. Therefore, they're limited in time. They're not just there to chat. They need stuff answered immediately. They need resources that are accessible through a mobile device. They often interact with our website, usually during off hours, right? They don't do it during the regular business day because they're often out there fighting fires or managing their teams or doing other stuff. That stuff becomes really important because it starts to kind of answer some of the questions of what are those pain points, and more importantly, what information is most appropriate for them. But again, you're stumbling around a little blindly if you don't know these personas. So it gets down to knowing your membership DNA, right? So what does that DNA look like? How do they live, eat, breathe? How do they consume information across the whole? And then specifically, how do they consume your information? So it's across, again, we're straddling both worlds of past historical data and data you may know about your members and kind of extrapolate, as well as how do they plan to interact in the future as well, right? So again, thinking about those pieces, but mapping it together is another key component of inbound marketing, especially when it comes to content creation and content marketing itself. And so that's what we often do, which is, draft out these personas, figure out, kind of refine them, make sure that everyone agrees that these are the unique personas that we interact with kind of across the whole organization, right? And then start to ask the questions of, what are they looking for in the buying stage, right? What are they looking for during the discovery stage versus, the discovery awareness stage versus the consideration stage versus, when they decide, right? So what kinds of pieces of information, based on now what we know about them, what can we put in front of them? Right? So hopefully it starts to become a little easier to kind of take your content and start to map it. So it's very hard to say, like, let's start with our content map, let's do the full inventory, and let's go ahead and say what helps with each kind of stage if you don't know your persona. So you really want to think about it from that perspective, and that's really what inbound sets you up for. So from our perspective today, some of the questions that we try to answer is what content do we have? Right, so obviously we want to map it to those buyer's journeys of personas, and then talking about the content that we need to develop. Realizing that we don't have a lot of time, we don't have a lot of resources, we've got to create content. So it's a question of what content do you have today, right? And that's usually earmarked for the people that you already know, who interact with you, who consume. So what can you do from that perspective and optimize? And then what do you have to, where are the gaps? What do you have to create to appeal to the user that you possibly may not know everything about that user, kind of as you're trying to acquire them, then they may not know a lot about you as well, right? So, it's different sides of the coin, but it's things that you have to think about when you're talking about content creation as a whole. So a lot of what I touched on goes back to the concept of content marketing. So taking a definition of content marketing as a whole, you may have heard this term. Again, it's been around for a while. Content marketing strategies and content marketing has been around for a while. It's just been given now kind of a label to make sure it's very specific so that you have teams and you have people dedicated to this. But essentially, content marketing is a strategic marketing approach, right? Focused on creating and distributing valuable, relevant, and consistent content to attract and retain a clearly defined audience and ultimately to drive profitable customer action. So you can see now how this overlays onto the inbound methodology very nicely, right? So again, we're looking for a strategic approach, right? So it's not all tactical. A lot of this has to do with planning up front, right? And then we're marketing. We're creating content and distributing it to a very clearly defined audience. We always know who we're talking to, who we're marketing to, who this content is for. It needs to be for a specific type of user, a specific type of persona, right? And the whole intent, right? So the whole intent is to make sure you take your content, once it reaches that specific user, drives them to do something, right? A compelling action, right? So it's not sitting out there for awareness, it's sitting out there for awareness, but you want them to take the next logical step, right? You want to move them closer to the funnel, you want to convert them, you want to acquire them, right? So it's really kind of taking the strategic pieces, overlaying them with some of the tactical execution pieces, and making sure everything's kind of moving in concerted effort, right? So you really want to think about this, and that's kind of the underpinnings, again, of inbound marketing. So often you'll hear you'll hear some of these terms interchanged between content strategy versus content marketing. And the difference is that, content strategies obviously starts first, and this is the brain, right? So this is the bigger picture, goals oriented, it's what drives the actual plan. So you can't really, you can't put the cart before the horse. You have to really start thinking about, what do you want to accomplish inside of your content strategy? What are our goals? Who are our audiences? Who are our target audiences? What are those buyer personas? What's our mission? What are we trying to establish? What topics of areas of interest are we covering, right? And what's our channels of delivery before we get to the actual content marketing plan and the calendar, right? So it's keying all that stuff up and then moving into the content marketing piece, which is the actual kind of like the output, right? It's the delivery of your content strategy. So in this, here are your kind of categories of content marketing. Here are all the different pieces that you can leverage and coordinate into your content calendar and kind of roll out the door, right? So this is the output of your organization. This is the work you do. So now we've highlighted some of these items here because when you think about it from a content creation standpoint, you can create additional content to support what you currently have, right? And the ones in blue are the ones where you can create that. Right, so like I said, so we only have an hour today. I'm going to hit on a number of topics, but quite frankly, any one of the topics that we hit on, they can kind of stand on their own as another piece of information, as another content to be consumed. Right, so what's nice and what's different now kind of in the world that we're in inside of digital marketing is that we're not limited to print copies. We're not limited to just articles. Now we can leverage blog posts. Content is now even the broader category that falls into user-generated content, so it's comments. Right. In addition to that, it's infographics. It's taking the visual representation of data, putting some numbers behind it and visually representing it. Right. It's photos, it's imagery, it's videos, it's podcasts. It's all these things now that we didn't have access to before. But these are the things that'll help support you create further content. Right. So it's not to say that you're limited to only creating white papers. White papers, they're excellent pieces of content. Certainly, they're great calls to action. They do generate a lot of leads and interest, but they take a lot of time. You may not necessarily have the resources in-house to have a white paper written up every month, every quarter, right? So it takes a little bit of time. However, right, you do have access to a blog. You do have access to ebooks. You do have access to other distribution channels. So you could theoretically take that one white paper that you have, pull out the compelling pieces, and break it up into additional subtopics. Right, so now you're talking about breaking up your content, repurposing it to a degree, and kind of moving forward with that. All right, so those are options that are available to you, and that's something to think about. Right, so I touched on the whole concept of repurposing, and that's something that you should go back to your teams and really think about and ask the question. Are we currently repurposing content that we have today, and are we being effective in what we're doing? The repurposing content doesn't necessarily mean taking it and retargeting it out there, putting it back out there in the same form. It's taking it and thinking about how can you transform it into something that you can further do more with. All right, so again, taking an article and finding a compelling topic around the article. It's a very popular article on your website. Clearly the page views on this are very, very high. What more can you do with this? This is probably something where you could take a conversation. So organizations like blogs and blog posts because for that interactivity, it's a very short turnaround in terms of production. You are not restricted to you're not limited or restricted to 5,000 words. Like, you don't have to have so many boundaries around it, right? The expectations are lower on blog posts as well. People expect them not to be so lengthy and verbose, right? They expect that some multimedia is possibly added in there. They like the idea of things that are happening in real time and it's recent, and they get notified about it. So you're not working under some of the constraints and limitations that you might have been before, right? But you really want to think about, all the stuff we're putting on there, including your events, right? You do so much ramp up and lead up time to the event. You put the events, the annual conferences, you put them on. It's a massive effort, and then, you do some post-conference follow-up and everything's done, right? But if you really look at your events themselves and think about all the content that's actually being produced at the event, how can you strategically and effectively be efficient about harnessing that content that's coming out of that output, and thinking of different ways in which to kind of share it and repurpose it. So the whole point of this, the evidence of benefits of membership, the whole point of this is to avoid having to rely on your membership benefits page, right? The one that has all the bullets as to here's why you should join and here are all the benefits. The whole point is to find content, repurpose content, create content that your persona, your targeted persona, they would find interesting, of value, entertaining, of high level of value, right? So you want them at the end of the day to say, that was worth it. That was worth my time to read, 2 minutes on my phone of the email that I got, or the newsletter I got, or the link to watching the video kind of recap of the session, right? That you just want them to make sure that they appreciate, it's like an acknowledgement. That's the benefit. It's the acknowledgement that yes, this was worth it. I learned something. This is why I have a membership with the organization. Right. So when you go back to your teams, these are things to think about. You also want to think about like how much effort do you currently spend today, and how much effort would it be to repurpose some of those materials. And you'd be surprised to see how how little effort sometimes it will take. Right. So again, something to think about. So we typically go into our session evaluating, doing a couple of case studies. I think this is an appropriate time to take the time to walk through 2 case studies with you, just so you can see it in action. Again, the whole point here is so that you get inspired, and so thinking about ways in which you could also leverage kind of the same strategies that these organizations have. So you may have heard the Electronic Retailing Association, ERA, heavy user of HubSpot. So their content marketing strategy revolves around the blog. So they have a blog. It's an industry blog. And so the Electronic Retailers Association, their members are, the direct TV sales, right? They're the home shopping network. Those are its members. So the target audience, right? The target persona is, the persona with personality, character, very ego-driven, thinking about, name and light. See, that's what he's motivated by. So this person, right? So when ERA kind of sat down and said, how are we going to go about targeting our target persona? How are we going to leverage all the materials that we have and make sure it gets out to these people and engage with them? They came up with this concept of putting a blog together, and the blog wouldn't be produced. The content on it wouldn't be produced by staff. They would ask key members to go ahead and comment on certain topics, right? So, internal topics were put together. These are the typical topics that are of very interest to us, to the membership base. This is what we constantly get asked, and they essentially went out and recruited these members. So they built kind of a word of mouth following. It gained a lot of popularity. You can kind of see here, kind of over a period of time, their blog views just incrementally, dramatically increased. And that's because it really resonated with their members. The content was being produced by members and being read by the other members. In turn, ERA started to get contacted by these other members saying like, hey, how can I contribute? I think I have, some compelling information. In addition to that, they saw a lot of engagement on the blog posts themselves. There were a lot of comments, direct comments that were kind of saying, I just watched this, I'm trying to figure out what they wanted to communicate. It was a conversation that was starting to happen. In addition to that, not everyone was subscribed to the blog in real time. And so what ERA did was that they set up email notifications, and what those were automated email notifications that were set up on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So essentially kind of giving a rundown and expanding their reach further to those members that may be a little bit more distant, right, but still interested in the information and the topics at hand, right? So a lot of positive member feedback and engagement around the blog. It felt like, it's straight from the members, it's not preachy, it's about, experiences from the field, it's just information that's consumable and in a format that is enjoyable and highly engaging. So they experienced a lot of growth with that. So they wondered, what can we do further, right? So now we've got some high activities on our blog. We've got multiple posts, people posting, around certain topics, like high visibility. What else can we do? Well, they started to see that, let's create another offer, right? So again, inbound marketing is about creating those offers, putting them out on landing pages, getting those submissions, right? So let's create something. So the bulk of the work had already been done by the members by posting on the blog. Really, ERA staff became the curators in conjunction with a couple of members to help edit. But essentially, they pulled all the blog posts that were tied around a certain topic that had been, discussed over a course of time, and put it into an ebook. And so they compiled all this information, and really their focus now turned to content curation, right? And that's what it's about now. So they essentially compiled all this stuff, they put it into an ebook, and then they saw their interactions rapidly move up, right? So 519 views, 351 submissions, 67 new contacts out of an industry that's very mature kind of in this market. For them, it was a great success. And again, you know, from a production standpoint, they didn't have to do a lot. So this is, you know, technically it's content that's being repurposed. It's content that was originally produced. You know, I guess we can extend the definition of content to be, you know, less traditional. This is user-generated content because it falls into the social media category. It's into the blog category. But again, what they did is they were smart enough to kind of see the trend. They were watching the conversations and then strategically pull all that together and compile it into another offer. So really just a nice way in which to gain traction. So this is just a little view of how they currently, you know, before they started this initiative, right? So they relied heavily on email marketing. Email marketing, by far, you know, the heaviest source of traffic to drive, you know, to their website, to their blog. That was the highest level of interaction kind of across the board before they started this initiative. Right, and then, you know, they acknowledged that they were looking at the blog posts, they were looking at the emails that they were communicating, and they acknowledged, you know, some of the items that weren't so successful, right? So they did also, you know, some outreach. They definitely sent emails as much as they could because that was kind of, you know, the marketing tactic, their base marketing tactic that they started with. But you can see here what they have in common, right? So low views, low submission rates, and it's because they're pushing. Right, they're pushing a lot of industry. They're not pushing industry information. They're pushing organizational membership information. Right, so it's like we've got a meeting room sale. We've got, you know, your membership will get you a free conference all access pass. You know, here's the networking branding guide for this conference. So you see, like the views kind of vary right across the board again, but the submission rate, right, the actual click through and the interaction, very, very low. Right, because again, they were not framing up the message in terms of here's what you want, here's stuff that's coming straight from the members. It was all very kind of heavily oriented towards push. So what they did notice, again, what types of content did work really well was predictions, right? Content that was created specifically for them because they had asked for it. So again, a very competitive industry. People are really kind of, you know, they need to make sure that they have eyes on whatever products they're selling, what they're doing. So they're always interested in research. They're interested in predictions or what's coming down the pike, right? So if ERA published, you know, after, you know, again, behind the scenes creating this content, interviewing their base and saying, you know, here's what our experts are saying for 2015 or, you know, for the year. Here's, you know, here's something that you might find interesting, and look at their views. So again, you know, the views versus submission rate, look at the submission rate and the contact rate. High engagement. Suddenly everybody's really interested in that. That's what performed really well, right? Almost comparatively to the ebook. Right, so it's just ways to think about. So the content that you traditionally prepare today, if it's focused heavily on your message, right, and there's always going to be that paradigm. It's always going to be that shifting dichotomy between what the organization wants to put in the email and what the member wants to see in the email. It's very unusual to see that they line up. Everybody has different agendas, you know, and the whole point is to understand that. Understand that internally, this is what we have to put out there. And then understand that, you know, externally, your member is looking for something. They may not line up, but you are in a position to create content that allows you to have that relationship with your member and provide that additional insight. So essentially what ERA did kind of, you know, for their ebook production, they did another one. And they worked it into, they essentially, this is what, when we're talking about content repurposing, this is what we mean. Right, so it's not like they had to do a lot of preparation before time, you know, ahead of time. They had their event coming up. One of the topics was web optimization for direct response. They had a very well-known speaker at the session. So what they did is a pre-show interview. So first piece of content, they did a video interview. Second piece of content, they did a blog post about it. Third piece of content, they were in person at the educational session. Right, so there was a specific session that had to do with this particular topic. They were there. Right, recording it, tweeting it. People were, you know, having, you know, conversations about it. Fourth piece of content after the session. Immediately after the session, they got the speaker to agree to an interview. Right, so Speaker Oded Noy, you know, he did an interview. It was recorded. fifth piece of content, it was a post-session video recording. So wrapping up everything, right? So after the session, here's someone else kind of pulling it all together and kind of saying, here's where we landed on these topics. So you can see now, from a production standpoint and level of effort, you have already put in a level of effort to be at the conference. Your sessions are happening. Now what you're doing is you're going out there and you're taking little snippets, right? So this is not a big effort. This is a strategic, coordinated effort to leverage those pieces to create new ways in which the content can be consumed, right? So you see a mix of multimedia in here. And then the remaining piece of content. So they created like 10 pieces of content. The first 5 were all kind of at the show, on site, in the show, and the remaining ones were follow-ups on the blog from different people. Different topics, so making sure that, again, they were taking elements of this and talking about kind of not only the recap, but let's go highlight some concepts, and then let's get into kind of advanced topics that we didn't quite touch or we didn't quite delve in very deeply, but we could do that here, right? So again, building that interest over that period of time ultimately resulted in their final piece of content that they repurposed, and that was another ebook, right? So essentially kind of taking all the relevant insights, all the content that was produced at the conference, right, during the conference and immediately after the conference, it was all taken together, it was synthesized, right, and created an ebook that allowed ERA to, again, further pursue some lead generation strategies and grow their lists by offering this. So a very kind of successful campaign for them. And hopefully that inspires you because, again, once you have that stuff, the rest of your digital marketing campaigns and your digital marketing vehicles come into play, right? So the added bonus and the uplift here with social media, helped amplify, right? So for those people who didn't attend the conference or heard about the conference, watched the video, but then were made more aware of, here's the stuff that we've got on our blog that has to do with this topic, right? So watch the interview, watch the post-session interview, see the recap, right? So all these things kind of had an additive effect. And so here's the output, right? The output now is that ERA benefited from more traffic, not just reliance just on email marketing, but their organic search went up, their direct traffic went up, and obviously they increased that bump in social media as well, right? So that all of this is all additive, right? So it's not one thing that has the benefit. All of it combined together is what plays into that, and that's really part of the strategy that you want to consider. So quickly, let me see if I can share my browser with you. Another idea, right? So again, something that they leverage and something that should be fairly easy to do because you have all the materials is they essentially kind of took all the stuff that happened at the conference last year and put it in here for this year's conference site, right? So we're on their D2C 2016 site, and they have a section called Why Attend, which is typically what we normally see across most conference sites. So what's unusual about this, and this is a very high-performing page for them, is that essentially you can see it tells the whole story, right? It tells the whole story of here's, a video of what happened at the conference, the type of networking that you can have. It tries to tell you a story of, you come to this, here are the types of people that you interact with, here's why it's compelling for you. And it's relying on materials that were produced for last year's conference, right? So it's got a nice infographic here. It's telling you who's going to be at the conference, why it makes sense for you. Why, if you're going from an international perspective, this is why it's compelling, right? So it's actually breaking out all the information that they likely already produced, right? They have to produce it and recycling it, reusing it, right? Using it as a compelling reason to kind of say, hey, let's go ahead and see what else is coming up, right? So check out all the things that happen on the actual list itself. So as I said, it's actually a very, pictures, things engage. It's a very high-performing page. We often use it as a metric to say, if they've opened their email, they've taken a look at the schedule and the roster, and they've actually checked out why attend, we're going to do some sort of special follow-up for them. But they haven't registered, we're going to do some sort of special follow-up because it's a highly qualified person, who wants to know and has obviously seen all the benefits here. So again, the benefits from this perspective are really from their persona perspective, right? So this is not benefits for us as the organization. This is us kind of putting ourselves in their persona, marketing Mike, and seeing, if he needs to come to this, what's going to be most compelling for him. And seeing information translated or transformed into this visual representation gives them a chance to kind of work that further. So our second case study is AACSD. and they're the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business. So we talk about this one. I'm sharing this insight because it's really interesting. They essentially had a sense that they were creating a new marketing email communications vehicle for their membership. And essentially before that went out, we did some data analysis. And data analysis revealed that the target market that they thought they were sending to wasn't what they assumed it to be. Right? The data actually told a completely different story. Right? So their target market are deans of business schools. So these are white, affluent males. And they assumed that any information, long-form newsletters, things like that, sent by the organization are read during the day at their desk. When in fact, in reality, the analytics showed that long periods of time were spent reading the materials, but not during the day. It was on off hours, on personal time, on a tablet, on a mobile device, not at their desk. And that makes sense because they're probably firefighting or handling issues. And these are people, you know, again, your persona is very interested in learning, right? Acquiring knowledge, acquiring information. So they know that they lean on the organization for that. But what they didn't know and didn't quite realize or misrepresented was that how the information was being consumed. And that's why we put a lot of emphasis from the persona perspective about thinking about that. How do your users consume information that across the board, you know, how do they look at news, how do they consume entertainment, that kind of stuff, as well as how do they consume your information, right? So before they sent out their newsletter, they kind of redid it a little bit, you know, to make sure that it was more in line with what the user, what their targeted persona, their targeted member was looking for. So it's called the LINK, which stands for Leading Insights, News, and Knowledge. And it's essentially been designed specifically for how their target audience consumes their information. And it starts with information about a member, all the way at the top, Spotlight of the Week. Right, so Spotlight of the Week is the effort to reach out to a particular member, get information about them, get their thoughts, and make sure that, you know, they're heavily promoted. And this was a very successful venture for them, right? It was a very successful path to go down because, again, these are individuals, these members, you know, it's human nature, as humans, we're complicated but very simplistic in some other ways, right? So the competitive nature, the desire to be, wait a minute, like, how do I get on there? Right? I'm a member too. I volunteer, I contribute, I participate. I would like to kind of see my name in the lights as well. That kind of thing created a level of demand so that staff didn't actually, you know, in the future, they didn't have to try very hard to actually find the information about members. Like members were lining up to kind of say, I would also like to be featured as well. Right? So a way that shifted some of the way in which content was created now is the role shifted inside of staff to be less content creation driven and more kind of on the content curation side. But in their newsletter, positions 1 through 5 at the top half of the newsletter, and this is our mobile version, so I apologize, it's a little blurry, but they have nothing to do with the membership or membership benefits. It is all about, you know, the member and articles that the member would be interested in by nature of knowing kind of what their areas of interest are and how long they spend on these types of topics, right? And the whole intent is to entertain, inform, delight, educate, right, without doing the hard push of, you know, buy our stuff, right, or sign up for a webinar, right? So it was really a conscious effort knowing that, you know, all this information would be consumed over a long period of time on their personal time at their own pace, but that's how they consume the information. So now staff, again, focuses more on the curation of content rather than having to scramble to create content from scratch or putting stuff out there. So after being able to kind of see, you know, those first 5 pieces of information that are very kind of informative, educational, now we move to kind of a member benefit, but it's been phrased up in a way, right? We use do you know, did you know, a fun fact in a graphic format, right? So that's your member benefit, right? So that statistic is probably something that's in the membership benefits page on the website, but it was broken out and kind of visually given as a graphic. Right, so again, you know, it's tapping into the space, you know, they're deans of business schools, you know, they want to know the statistics, but it makes it easy to kind of read and remember and move on to the next piece, right? So now you see they've gone through some of the information, they've consumed it, now they don't mind looking at the events that we're trying to push, right? So they don't mind looking at it, they're like, yeah, not only have I, you know, I've seen something interesting about a colleague or a member, you know, a fellow member, I read all of my articles, I've learned something, so was this worth it? This was worth it. sure, I'll look at the events and I'll look at the industry sponsors and the remaining topics that are at the bottom of the email because, it's been worth my time. And so the whole point now is to focus on creating that right experience, right? So that's, from that perspective, your position, right, your team is now working on, should be more focused on content curation, right? So you're really kind of delving deeper to find those members, and not necessarily find those members, but find the topics and content that would be of interest to them, right? The rest of the pieces follow simply because you've created a vehicle that's high loyalty, high engagement, and produces results, right? So again, AACSB is now in a position where members line up, right, and say, how can I get featured? So they don't have to go and hunt, so they don't have to go and ask for members to participate. They've got a list ready and waiting. Right, so you can kind of see where the focus and the effort turns to as well. When we're talking about content repurposing, that's really what we mean, right? We want you to leverage what you have. So the secret to all of this, why it's successful is because, it's knowing your membership DNA. You have to know how to read the data that's out there, right? So don't assume anything. And this is why going through a persona workshop, going through those exercises are very important, because you might discover pockets of opportunities that you may not necessarily have thought of, right, by looking at the data that you have available versus, traditional word of mouth or traditional oral history kind of passed along thing. Our members are typically like this. We look at data and say, well, yes, let's see, how do they consume the information, right, and does it match up, right? So essentially you want to have someone on staff to actually sit there and think of each persona to say, do we have something for this particular persona, this person? Right, so it goes back to knowing your people and knowing kind of what they're looking for, what their pain points are. Again, tying it back to what the whole point of inbound marketing is, which is, again, to be able to provide that context and that framework and that content that helps them move through their journey, through their own buyer's journey. So definitely the intent is to, the successful teams will actually look at their content strategy and content marketing plans and then be open and honest with the acknowledgement that all content isn't equal. Right? Same thing as all members are not equal, right? And it's okay to be elitist. It's okay to say that, it's okay to think in those terms to a degree to say this content is okay for this type of member, however, this content is not going to work for that other type of member. And it's perfectly fine to think about that. It's, it's much more effective, in a question that we, it's a good question. And this question is about essentially, Can you answer who pays for the membership, right? So your member, do they pay out of their own pocket or does their company pay for them? And is that a motivator for how they interact with you and what they purchase further, right? So it's a difference. If I'm a member of the association, the American Marketing Association, and I pay out of my pocket, I'm going to get very frustrated when all I see in the emails and the communications and all the stuff that comes back to me is stuff that I still have to pay for, right? So part of me is thinking like, wait a minute, so what do I get for my membership, right? I already paid out of pocket for this. Why am I not getting the discount? Why don't you have something for me that's free, right? Versus the member who, again, it's not highly valued, there's no value system to it, right? I'm not valued higher than someone else, but another member whose membership is paid by their company, they might not necessarily be so price sensitive. So therefore, they wouldn't be alienated if if we were to put all that information in front of them. But you want to take that time to understand the difference and that distinction, because it is going to help, drive those numbers higher, drive your conversion numbers higher. So then to kind of recap what we've been talking about, the whole point of this is coming down to really repurposing your content. And repurpose does not mean recycle. Repurpose doesn't mean reshare. Right, repurpose is to kind of say, take your elements of your content marketing plan, think about them, how you approach them, and think about how you can drive further interest, right? So one article can be broken into many, one interview can be segmented into many parts. You can do an ongoing series. In addition to that, you can supplement that ongoing series with further blog posts, right? So you can think about, and you can be creative as well. Right, so the ERA created a combination of infographics with images. They had a lot of imagery and photographs of what happened at their conference. Same thing with AACSB. They created an infographic or a little statistic, right, just a visual representation of their member benefit. But because it's put in such a way, it's like, oh, that's really easy to consume. It's something I'm going to remember. I learned something, so that was great. Right, so it's just ways in which to further think about your content and further break it down. you're in a position of advantage today because that's really what members do look for. Nobody has the time to really sit down and read a 5-page article, but they'll certainly appreciate it if you're able to synthesize, summarize the information, and give it to me kind of in bite-sized chunks. Again, I'm not losing the value of the content. If I want to go to the original source material, I can, right? But I am definitely appreciative of the extra effort that it's taken for you to do that work for me. And so that's opportunities for you to kind of evidence that membership that expand beyond the simple kind of, here's why you should join. So a lot of this has to go back to knowing your members again. So I'm going to harp on that a lot. So personas, think about your personas. If you need help with that, certainly reach out to us. But it is a big effort, right? And it is clearly very beneficial. And think about, the shift that you want to make internally so that you're constantly looking at data to understand how your information is being consumed, and more so thinking about ways in which you can shift your entire role kind of so that your team starts to be that content curation. They be that content curator for your member, for your persona, right? And that's the big value. So that's a big responsibility, and that's a big value for the member. The member will look to your organization to say, you clearly know me very well. You know my interests, you know my pain points, you know what irritates me, you know what I like, right? I'm looking to you to provide me with that information. Provide me with content that is that resonates with me, and I can clearly see the benefit and the value of, my membership. And it goes beyond the self-directed, self-driven interest, right? There is a level of, you can self-select into your fields of study or areas of interest. That's one aspect and one element of it, right? But you do have to think about what else can you supplement to that. Otherwise, I as a member am doing all the work and I don't see the value, right? So things to think about from that perspective. I will leave you guys with one thought. Again, pretty relevant since we've been talking about personas and buyer journeys and repurposing content, but good marketers see the consumer as a complete human being with all the dimensions that real people have. So again, these personas are not, one-dimensional characters. They need to be fleshed out. You need to really think of them as people. They just simply represent a group of distinct people that you are trying to work with, trying to engage, and trying to solve their problem for. So I hope this was interesting for everyone. I will leave the lines open for a little bit if anyone has any questions that they want to put into the chat window. Otherwise, have a good rest of the day.